Hello and welcome to the Sad Crime Channel. Today's story took place in the United States, in the state of Idaho, in Coeur d'Alene, where an almost perfect couple, Larry and Lori Isenberg, lived. Unfortunately, as it would later turn out, one of them had a dark secret that would lead to tragedy. It was Tuesday, February 13, 2018, the day before Valentine's Day. 68-year-old Larry Isenberg and his wife Lori, 64, decided to go on a romantic boat trip. They were at the marina before sunrise and began preparing for their journey. They planned to watch the sunrise from the deck and have breakfast at a local hotel 16 miles away. Around 7 a.m. they set out on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Initially, everything went according to plan, although the morning was really cold. The couple turned on the heater and soon it became pleasantly warm. Unfortunately, the idyll didn't last long. At 10:23 a.m., Lori called the emergency number. She was distraught and panicked. She told the operator that she was on the lake but didn't know exactly where. With a breaking voice, she said that her husband might have had a stroke and fallen overboard. She repeated that she couldn't find him. Fortunately, it was possible to quickly locate where Lori was calling from, and rescuers rushed to help. Shortly thereafter, Lori was found and transported to the shore. Wrapped in a blanket in the rescue cabin, she tried to explain what had happened. However, she couldn't gather her thoughts. She kept repeating that she couldn't find her husband and was crying. Only after she calmed down a bit was she able to say anything. She stated that at some point, Larry told her something was wrong with the engine and went to check it. After a moment, he turned around, and when he looked at her, he looked terrible. He was pale and had a strange expression on his face. Then he staggered and fell into the water. Lori rushed toward him, wanting to help, but tripped over the heater and fell. She injured her nose, which indeed looked bad and was bleeding at the time. Divers started their search immediately, but it was clear they were likely looking for a body. It was February. The water in the lake was terribly cold and quite deep. The chances of saving the man were close to zero. The search initially focused on the area where Lori was found in Powderhorn Bay, about 4 miles from where the couple started their journey. Their starting point was Sunup Bay. The couple hadn't even reached halfway through their planned route when the accident occurred. Meanwhile, Lori was taken to the hospital, and the police began searching the boat. Bloodstains were found in several places, likely from Lori's nose injury. Larry and Lori had been married for 17 years and together for nearly 30. They had 8 children, 15 grandchildren, and a great-grandchild, though these were from their previous marriages. They were doing very well, living in a beautiful large house with a huge garden in a charming wooded area on Bobcat Trail in the Cougar Gulch area. They were respected and engaged in the local community. Larry was already retired. Previously, he held a managerial position in a timber industry company and was responsible for implementing a forest fire control and burning program. Lori still worked at the North Idaho Housing Coalition, a local nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing access to decent and affordable homes for low to moderate income individuals and families. Lori and Larry loved spending time together. They traveled, visited Hawaii and Europe, went on fishing trips, and hunted. Larry always looked at his wife with admiration and love. He wanted her to be happy, and it was clear he loved her very much. They both spoke positively about each other and rarely argued. Their children recalled it was both boring and charming. It was certain that their marriage was very successful. News of their parents' accident quickly reached their children. They found it hard to believe, as just a few hours earlier, they had received a sunrise photo from Larry. They did think it was a bit crazy that their parents were going on such a trip in February.
He's in the water? Hang on one second. Let me get
didn't feel good, and he was doing things weird, and then he went up to the motor, and the motor wasn't broken, it was the other motor.
Okay.
And then I said, why are you doing that? And he turned to look at me, and his face just looked...
Okay.
It looked awful, and then it just started to fall, and I tried to get the door open and get to him, and I couldn't grab him, and I fell.
I'm just going to try to ask you some questions so we can kind of figure out where to go from here. Okay? Can you tell me, how'd you get the bloody nose?
I fell down.
You fell down.
So
Okay.
she fell against the door.
Trying to
She was
grab
trying
him.
to...
Okay. All right. Well, we got
Find him.
we got the best people out there looking for him right now, okay? So we're going to do what we can.
But that was just like them. Larry always said that in retirement he could finally do what he wanted, when he wanted, and for as long as he wanted. Everyone, including the rescuers, investigators, and local residents, believed it was just another unfortunate accident. However, an investigation had to be conducted in such cases. So when Lori was discharged from the hospital, a police officer visited her to discuss what exactly happened on that fateful day. Lori started her story from the beginning. At 6:40 a.m., Larry took the memorable sunrise photo and sent it to his children. Then, for a while, the couple cuddled and then set off. Larry took the helm and Lori decided to take a nap. When she woke up, her husband was leaning on the steering wheel so much that the key fell out of the ignition. At that moment, the emergency stop switch with the safety cable also fell to the ground. Such switches allow the machine to stop in case of a malfunction or life-threatening situation. At that moment, the engine stopped. Larry went to the front of the boat where the electric motor was located, and then something happened. When he turned around, he had a blank stare, started tripping over his own feet, and fell into the water. Lori didn't know what to do when Larry disappeared. She didn't have her phone with her because she had left it in the car. She thought that her husband probably had his cell phone in his pants pocket, and she practically had no way to call for help. She decided to look for him. She didn't want to move away from the spot where he had fallen into the water. She pressed the horn to attract attention. She wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when she took a blanket to cover herself, she saw her husband's phone. She then called the emergency number. Lori still couldn't believe what had happened. Just a few weeks earlier, in January, they had been in Florida with the whole family and had a great time. Later, she and Larry started preparing for another trip. They planned to take an RV to the west coast of the USA and spend 2 or 3 months there. However, in February, while packing, Lori said she wanted to go back to Florida. Larry was a bit surprised. They had just been there recently, but since he loved making his wife happy, they simply hit the road. One could say it was a dream vacation for a 68-year-old. Together with Lori, he relaxed, sailed, and even watched the launch of the Falcon Heavy rocket. At the end of this trip, Larry felt worse. He had chills, was constantly tired, and was distracted. He was worried he had caught the flu, but when he returned home just a few days before the Valentine's Day boat trip, he felt better. A few days after the accident, police officers knocked on Lori's door with a search warrant. They took her computer and various documents, and a few days later she was arrested. However, her arrest had nothing to do with her husband's disappearance. Lori was accused of theft and financial fraud. It turned out that just before their last trip to Florida, the accountants at Lori's company noticed some irregularities in the finances. They discovered strange expenses and invoices, and the checks were signed only by Lori, without prior approval from the board. Lori explained that she was aware of how busy the board members were, and that's why she signed the checks herself, as she didn't want to bother them. She admitted that she made a mistake and even asked to be fired. Instead, they put her on paid leave since she had planned to take one anyway. During this time, the board wanted to investigate the matter further. Lori had worked at the organization for several years and was really good at what she did. Her colleagues believed it was just sloppy bookkeeping and that everything would soon be clarified. However, the opposite turned out to be true. The case was very serious, and Lori was eventually suspended. It turned out that using her position over more than 2 years, she had embezzled almost $580,000. Soon after her arrest, the local police handed the case over to the FBI. 4 months later, Lori was charged with federal offenses, theft, and embezzlement. The FBI stated that she had committed a very sophisticated fraud. She created fictitious companies and issued invoices. Then she paid them with money from the organization she worked for. These companies were registered under the names of 3 of her daughters, and Lori transferred the stolen money to them. Another daughter was employed at Lori's company as her assistant and received a salary for doing nothing. The position and duties existed only on paper. Additionally, Lori also transferred extra money to this daughter. It's worth noting that Lori and Larry didn't have any children together. They both had been in previous marriages. Lori had 6 daughters and Larry had a daughter and a son from his previous relationship. Larry's attitude towards money is also relevant to this case. He achieved everything through hard work. He didn't trust loans and only bought something when he could afford it. He instilled in his children the importance of money and the need to regularly monitor expenses. He always told his children that being a decent, honest, and modest person was what mattered most. He taught them to work hard. He was happy when he could spend time with them. Those moments were particularly precious to him. Lori, on the other hand, came from a very poor family. As a child, she didn't have a home, sleeping wherever she could until someone kicked her out. In her teenage years, she met Stephen, and when she was 19, she married him. Later, she achieved considerable success. She met Larry when she was hired as a secretary at the company where he also worked. They both had partners, but the time spent together and business trips soon turned their acquaintance into a romance. Lori wanted to leave her husband but didn't know how to do it, so she began turning her daughters against him. They told their father that they wanted him to leave them. Stephen knew that his wife was having an affair. It wasn't the first time Lori had cheated on him. Eventually, Lori divorced her husband. A few years later, Larry also ended his marriage and they could finally be together officially. In 2004, they got married. In summary, Larry didn't like how Lori squandered money. He liked to keep a close eye on things. His children were also taught discipline in this regard. Lori, however, transferred money to her daughters with the condition that it remained just between them. And why did she even need additional funds? Larry and Lori never hid the fact that they were doing well financially. Larry played the stock market, and the couple made considerable gains from it. However, as Lori's daughters recall, their mother always liked to have her way. If she considered some rules stupid, she simply tried to bypass them. For example, when she once lost her job and wasn't allowed to take her belongings, she broke into the old company's office at night and took what she believed belonged to her. Local residents began to wonder if Larry was actually dead, or if he had escaped and was waiting for his wife with the money they had stolen together. For Lori, who was in jail, the court set bail at $75,000. Lori's daughter, the one not involved in her financial scams, agreed to bail her out. She believed that everything could somehow be explained and that it was all a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the authorities were still searching for Larry's body. The search was conducted using a helicopter and a special sonar. Lori also tried to help but couldn't remember anything specific or noteworthy about the place where her husband fell overboard. Besides, she behaved quite strangely. She would smile and joke, then burst into tears for no reason, and then, as if nothing had happened, continue the conversation. She told her daughters that the investigators wanted to frame her for her husband's murder. Moreover, she wanted to sell the house as soon as possible and leave. Finally, she concluded that she could no longer stay there. Her daughters decided to rent her a hotel room and started packing and moving her belongings. At that point, concerned neighbors called the police, finding the sudden move and commotion suspicious. Meanwhile, Larry's children also went to the police station. They claimed that Lori was acting unusually and believed she might have been involved in the tragic boating accident. Then on March 1st, 2.5 weeks after Larry's disappearance, there was a breakthrough. His body was found on the shore of the lake. When Lori learned of this, she completely withdrew into herself. She stopped speaking and showed no interest in going to the sheriff's office for more information. Soon the autopsy revealed that there was no water in Larry's lungs. He hadn't died from a heart attack or stroke either. Particularly puzzling were the toxicology results. An autopsy found that he had a lethal amount of Benadryl in his system. Investigators remembered that a package of this medication had been found in Larry's car. It is an antihistamine used by people dealing with various allergies. Side effects include drowsiness, impaired reflexes, and dizziness. A normal therapeutic dose is 1,000 nanograms per milliliter. Larry had over 7,000 nanograms in his system. Everything indicated that Larry had been poisoned. Investigators began to wonder if he had also been under the influence of the drug when he felt unwell at the end of their Florida vacation. Perhaps it hadn't been the flu as he thought, but an overdose of Benadryl. After Larry's body was found, Lori told her daughters that she was convinced the police would try to pin the entire blame on her. She saw only two options: spend the rest of her life in prison or take her own life. Eventually, she decided she didn't need to die. She just needed to convince everyone that she was dead. And she began to devise a new plan. She would tell her daughters that they would never see her again and that they needed to say goodbye. However, it seemed that she ultimately abandoned this idea. Until, on the day she was supposed to appear in court for the theft charges, Lori did not show up. It is hard to imagine what her daughter, who had posted bail for her, felt at that moment. She not only lost $75,000, but also had to bear additional costs of $17,000 to find her mother and bring her to court. Moreover, this daughter was pregnant with her third child and due to give birth in a few weeks. The woman realized that her mother was a manipulator who cared only about herself and her comfort. Nothing and no one else mattered to her. Lori disappeared without a trace, and the police were unable to locate her. The case gained national attention, and soon even the famous Dog the Bounty Hunter wanted to get involved in the search for Lori. His involvement in the search for Lori meant only one thing for her daughter: greater costs. And then, unexpectedly, Lori showed up at the prosecutor's office. She had a new hairstyle and was tanned. She looked as if she had just returned from vacation, not like someone who had been hiding from the police. She probably hoped that she would only have to answer for the financial crimes and that they would then leave her alone. However, the detective handling Larry's case decided to take advantage of her presence and ask her a few questions. Lori was not inclined to cooperate. She said that such an interrogation should be conducted in the presence of a lawyer. During the investigation, the police discovered that on the morning of February the 13th, the sunrise photo was taken by Lori herself, contrary to her earlier statements. She later sent it to Larry, and it eventually reached his children. Investigators wondered if there was a chance that Larry was already dead by then. It turned out he wasn't because the photo was taken with an iPhone with the live function turned on. This feature captures a few seconds of sound during the photo, and on that live photo, Larry's voice could be heard, so he must have been alive at that time. Everything indicated that the 68-year-old had taken such a massive dose of Benadryl while on the boat. When the police reviewed the photos taken after the accident, they were particularly struck by one showing the inside of Lori's purse, especially a bottle of juice. They assumed that Larry must have taken the pills with that juice. They even conducted a small test. After dropping the medication into the juice, the pills completely dissolved within a few minutes. There was no trace of them. Investigators believed that Lori's original plan was quite different. She hadn't expected such a high dose of the drug to act so quickly and violently. She probably intended for the supposed accident to occur in much deeper water. Officers were convinced that when Larry fell overboard, Lori sailed as far away as she could before calling emergency services. When rescuers found her, she was not at the location where her husband fell into the water but several miles away. That's why divers couldn't locate the body. They were simply searching in the wrong place. However, because Larry fell into shallower water, his body surfaced after a few weeks. Investigators found it challenging to determine exactly what had happened to the man. The presence of such a large dose of the drug in his system certainly played a key role. Even if Larry was still alive when he ended up in the water, being under the influence of the drug, he couldn't help himself or stay afloat. Because there was no water in his lungs, it could have been a case of dry drowning. This occurs when a small amount of fluid is swallowed, causing the vocal cords to spasm. This is a defense mechanism of the body to prevent water from entering the lungs. However, it is ultimately fatal. In dry drowning, water doesn't enter the lungs, but suffocation can occur due to a lack of oxygen. Larry might also have been dead when he fell overboard. One can't rule out the possibility of a struggle between Larry and Lori. After all, she had a damaged nose. When police reviewed Lori's computer search history, they discovered that before their trip to Florida, she had looked up information about drowning in that state, water currents, and the deepest spots. Additionally, on February 13th, newspapers were set to report that Lori had been fired and was suspected of financial misconduct. On the very day Lori and Larry went on their romantic outing, Lori's big secret was about to be revealed. Lori had even canceled their local newspaper subscription to prevent her husband from finding out. Lori knew well, as confirmed by both her daughters and Larry's children, that her husband would leave her if he found out. What Lori had done was fundamentally at odds with Larry's principles. Moreover, investigators discovered that a month before the accident, Lori had made changes to her husband's will. Her children were to inherit 80% of the estate under these amendments, while Larry's children would receive only 20%. In February 2020, Lori was officially charged with murder. The case did not go to trial because she decided to accept a plea deal. It was an Alford plea, which is a statement by the defendant that they do not admit guilt but acknowledge that the prosecution's evidence could likely result in a conviction. On May 24, 2021, a sentencing hearing took place. Larry's children and 2 of Lori's daughters attended. Everyone spoke, which was especially important for the accused's daughters. They wanted to show that they did not support their mother and that they were there for Larry. Lori also made a statement. For 50 minutes she read a prepared statement, page by page. She admitted that she was fully responsible for Larry's death. However, she claimed that she had put the pills in the juice because she intended to drink it herself to take her own life. She stated that Larry accidentally drank the juice while she was sleeping. Lori was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after no less than 30 years. She had previously been sentenced to 5 years for theft and embezzlement. Lori's 4 daughters, who had received stolen money from her, admitted to conspiracy to commit theft. They were sentenced to 3 years of probation and had to return the money they had received. Lori and Larry's house was sold, and the proceeds were used to pay off the debts resulting from Lori's financial fraud.
First off, I'm very happy to finally be able to tell the families what happened. It's not easy, but I want you to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is that I emphatically know that I am responsible for Larry's death. And I have known that from the very first day. I wish so badly that I could go back and tell my family what had happened right then. It would have saved so much pain. A week or 2 after the embezzlement was discovered, I knew that my life was over, and I had 2 options: death or life in prison. I know that Larry would still be alive if it was not for me fixing a drink with Benadryl in it so that I would be able to selfishly and cowardly take my life. If I wouldn't have had that bottle in there, he would not have accidentally drunk it.
That's the end of this story. Thank you for listening to the end. Take care. Goodbye.